to this problem.
That's amazing. So for those people tuning in, we will go live in approximately 10 minutes time. And tonight's session is in fact divided into a number of different categories. We're going to talk about the problem, but really importantly, we're going to be talking about solutions as well. And Luke, you're very much in the space of solutions, are you not?
Absolutely. Look forward to having the discussion.
That's incredible. Great to have you with us. And I'm going to ask, in fact, Professor Bonita Maisveld to turn on her microphone. Bonnie, welcome. I don't know if you can hear us.
I can. Thank you, Howard. And hi, everybody.
So, Bonnie, it's fantastic that we have tonight two winners of the Jewish Achiever Award, Women in Leadership Award. Judge Sharice Wiener won it a few years before you. You won it, was it 2018?
It was. Thanks, Howard. No, it's...
Remember the speech? It was very memorable.
Thanks, Dina. Remember it?
I think it was indelibly marked on the souls of everyone who actually heard it. It was the most astounding
Thank you. That's very
acceptance speech. So you're at WITS. How are things going and how is teaching going at WITS at the moment?
It's actually been quite remarkable because we've had to think about teaching and we've had to think about learning in a way that we've never had to before. It's very specialized, teaching online, teaching remotely. And I've just been amazed at the empathy that people have for students, particularly students who are not able to simply plug in, log on, and actually participate. And there's been incredible thought that's been given to addressing the type of inequality that we see in every other sphere of life shown up in stark light as a result of COVID. It's just been incredible. And I've got a whole new level of admiration, both for my colleagues and my students. And for those of us with children, for teachers.
How old are your kids, Bunny?
Just one and she's 5.
She's 5. And are you trying to homeschool at the moment as well as work?
Well, I'm not going to say on such a public platform exactly what I'm doing because I fear the response of reprehension and admonishment will be extensive. But let's say my aspiration daily is to keep her off the iPad. And in that, I'm
maybe the same bucket as most of the parents in South Africa, so don't worry, and potentially globally.
Probably right.
Well, fantastic to have you on this evening, and I feel like we may need lots of therapy both during the session and after the therapy, after the session. So, Wisile, welcome. Lovely to have you.
Thank you for having me, and good evening to everybody.
You're a therapist. I put on, when I originally put on clinical therapist, you said no. Tell us exactly what you do.
I'm a counseling psychologist and also a lecturer at Wits University. So I practice in Melville and I work a lot with marginalized communities. I'm actually quite pleased to see Luke. I have interacted with him for his Fight with Insight organization as well. So it's good to be here and to unpack this very serious issue in our society.
That's incredible. Fantastic to have you here. You're joined as well by a second psychologist who's on our panel, and that is Leanne. Leanne, do you go by Stillerman or Zabo?
You can call me Leanne Zabo. I'm sorry, I think my twins might be making an appearance upstairs, but I'm sure that will subside.
Fantastic. Great to have you with us. If you can potentially lift your camera just a little bit so the camera is eye level with you, that will really help us this evening. You're just looking down a little bit.
Okay, will do.
Fantastic. And Olivia, welcome, Olivia, and great to see you. You are going to be telling us a very personal and I think a very emotional story, are you not?
I am indeed. Thanks for inviting me on.
You are, of course, one of the victims of Bob Hewitt, who was a very famous tennis player at some point in time.
Yep, but now he's our most famous pedophile.
And also out on parole, is that correct?
Yes, he is out on parole, yeah.
So We're sure it's going to be a very riveting and moving story that you tell us. We look very forward to hearing. It must be difficult telling the story, is it not? Or now have you told it so many times that it's just become part of you?
No, it is. It's difficult every time. It's just for whatever reason, somehow the tears always come out, and I never know when it's going to happen. It's always at different times. So that's what really frustrates me. But no, I'm getting used to telling it, and it becomes easier, and it's more therapeutic every time I speak about it.
Well, let's actually ask Sasha-Lee. Sasha-Lee, welcome. I see you wearing your Miss South Africa sash. You were Miss South Africa 2019, is that correct?
Yes, and I still am.
You start when you must feel a little robbed of some of the glitz and glamour that go with being Miss South Africa, because you've spent the last 3-4 months in lockdown rather being able to go and experience kind of all the glory that goes with the crown.
You know, to be honest with you, I'm a fellow Witsi as well. I see some of our lecturers are here with us. So I think I'm used to not being among the glitz and the glam. I'm more, you know, in the Cullinan, in the library, more often than not. So I think I feel more robbed of my ability to be on the ground. And I think I've said this more often than not. I'm the product of the conversations that resonate with me the most. So not being able to converse with those on the ground and not being able to understand, you know, exactly the plight that they're in. Because it's one thing to try and solve something from the context of the way you understand it. It's just another thing to solve it from the context of how it's experienced. So I feel more robbed of my ability to be on the ground and be among, you know, South Africans.
And tell us, you're going to be telling us also a horrendous story of abuse tonight. That's almost given great meaning to this idea that a Miss South Africa can have an enormous impact on a particular subject that they choose.
You know, I think my presence on this platform, it signifies hope. It shows us and highlights the resilience of women and the resilience of survivors. And if anything, I think, you know, it's important to have platforms like these that highlight stories like the issues of gender-based violence and how exactly that impacts South Africa. And I think I'm just very grateful to have the opportunity to share my story today, and in doing so, liberate many.
So we're going to also be talking tonight about a conspiracy of silence. Were there people in your life who tried to silence you from telling your story as well?
I think there are people who continually try to silence many survivors, people in South Africa, people at home. It's something that has been experienced on a wide scale throughout South Africa, not just with me alone. And I think it's important that we understand the role that we play, you know, as these co-conspirators in sexual assault, in gender-based violence, and what we can do as society to really just introspect and understand and reflect on what it is that we can do better to lessen the cases of gender-based violence, and also to allow survivors to speak up and rightfully take back their dignity.
You know, people say that in any sort of crime, there's a victim, there's a perpetrator, but the crime could not happen without the bystanders who do nothing around them. And let us make sure tonight that we make sure that there are no bystanders standing idly by and allowing things to take place around them as well, without actually taking a stand and making sure that we rid the scourge from our society.
I honestly agree with that statement, yeah.
And Sipho, you join us. I'm going to unmute you as well, or ask you to unmute. Welcome, fantastic to see you. You are one of those people who've taken a stand, a very active and public stand against gender-based violence.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Such an honor to be part of the panel. Yeah, look, I think for me, I got to a point where it really broke my heart to see a lot of women and children going through gender-based violence. And I started asking myself questions as an individual and saying, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a friend, and I'm a child to a lot of to women. So what am I doing to take a stand against gender-based violence? And I've seen that a lot of men were a lot of male were uncomfortable to talk about this, and I just wanted to open up a platform for men to be comfortable to talk about this and be able to say, we can stand with women. You know, it doesn't have to be a fight for women alone. It can be a fight that we as men can stand alongside women and help them to be able to be free in our country. I mean, we are nothing without women. So if our women cannot be free in our beautiful country, then what are we in this country? Yeah.
Well, Sipho, thank you so much for taking such an amazing stand. To everyone listening, we're going to go live now. We're going to ask all of our panelists to turn their cameras off, except for Dina, Cherise, and Dan. And we are now going to commence this evening's activities. So a huge welcome to everyone. The time is 8:02. And welcome on behalf of the South African Jewish Report. This is now the 32nd lockdown webinar that we've had, and we've had quite a tough week. On Thursday last week, we picked up the issue of racism. On Sunday, we spoke about annexation. Today, we're speaking about gender-based violence. So it's been quite a traumatic and harrowing week for everyone watching our webinars. But a huge thank you to everyone who's joined us. We have approximately 1,000 people who've logged in already on Zoom and many more on YouTube as well. And we have a very interesting discussion about to go ahead. But as always, we want to thank Dan Stillerman. Dan, maybe if you can turn on your camera just so we can thank you. Dan, thank you. It's not easy. People don't realize just how difficult it is to put all of these together. The number of emails, the numbers of WhatsApps, the getting people ready, the checking of lighting and audio. This is a mammoth task that we're involved in.
Thanks, Howie. Yeah, I appreciate it. Sure. It's a lot going on behind the scenes, a lot of juggling, but no, it's all good. It's all for a great cause. So I'm really looking forward to this important discussion tonight. So yeah, thank you.
Well, a huge thank you to you. A huge thank you as well, in fact, to Glenn Wallman, because it was Glenn Wallman from the Angel Network who came to us and said, why don't we put together a panel on gender-based violence? And Dan and I said, absolutely, it's such an important issue. Why, in fact, don't we do that? Let's actually get to grips with it and start addressing these issues. So Glenn, to you and the Angel Network, thank you so much for helping us put this together. And this would be impossible without Judge Cherise Wiener. Cherise, I hope your camera is on. I'm trying to find you. Cherise, we'll introduce you in a second, but thank you. You've put in an enormous amount of work as well. You've got a very tough time tonight to try and keep us as short as possible because we have so many people on the panel, but we have really gathered the most remarkable experts in the country together tonight.
Thank you.
So
are we not about to start, Howie?
We will start in another minute or two. Just want to explain to people that if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a number of buttons. The one button is the chat button. If you'd like to chat and have everyone see what you're chatting about, please feel free to put any chats that you have in the chat section. If you'd like to ask any of the panelists a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, not the chat button. So very importantly, if you would like to ask a question, put it into the Q&A button. Alternatively, if you're watching on Zoom this evening, you can put it in the chat in Zoom, and Dan will be checking periodically Zoom and YouTube and moving questions from YouTube into Zoom as well and putting them into the Q&A button. We're actually trying out a new feature tonight, and that will allow you to click on the Q&A button, see the questions asked, and allow you to vote up any questions that you think are really important to try get it higher on the priority list. So play around, click on that Q&A button, try the upvoting, and let's see how that goes tonight. And Dina Diamond, a big welcome to you because you have two panels that you've put together for the weekend coming up. Tell us about those.
Absolutely, Howard. So as you've mentioned, we have had pretty much a tough time. We've addressed tough issues this week and obviously tonight, but there are critical conversations that we need to have. And then my job on the weekend is just to sort of lift the mood a little and to make people feel better, not just physically because it's freezing and it's cold, but also mentally because we've all stuck home and everything. So, and also this lockdown has taken its toll. So we are creating a webinar called Comfort Food. There we go. And we have got the most phenomenal cooks on our panel. We're going to have the likes of a Heidi Feldman, a Karen Malamed, Romy Rabinovitz, Susan Gregg, and a good couple of other surprises. And we are going to warm your hearts, warm your souls and your tummies. And hopefully it will be a great night. We'll learn some tricks on what to cook and make everyone feel a bit better. So that will be Saturday evening. So get your spoons and bowls ready for that one. And then Sunday evening, also on the continuation of being in lockdown and start looking at your furniture and your walls where you may not have had the time before to do that. So we are going to have a home improvement show where we're going to be giving some tips and tricks on what the trends are in terms of wall colors and paints, gardening, landscaping, lighting, home automation, all of those wonderful things. We've also got a great lineup, amazing contributors. So yes, hopefully if that's where your game is, then please tune in and join us for that evening, because I think we've got a great lineup both Saturday night and on Sunday.
Dina, I'm looking for someone who can do the walls in my home. Do you know anyone who does padded cells?
Oh, sometimes it might be a bit late for some intervention.
Well, Dina, we're certainly looking forward to Saturday evening. A huge thank you to you. Really looking forward to amazing, light, fun, and frivolous shows this weekend. So thank you so much for putting those together.
Absolutely, and well done on all of these. And Charisse, it's lovely to see you. I can see someone has definitely had their hair done. They have, so now you have you're looking fantastic. It's always lovely to see Charisse.
I didn't go out. The hairdresser came here.
But not only is Charisse an absolute wonderful woman, like she's just so talented. She's a judge, so she's so clever. She always looks amazing, but she's always just knitting squares. She's got amazing projects, which she does in her own right. So I know that you're in for a great, very, very full show tonight, and one that will be run by a lady of complete value and all the rest that she has. So thank you so much.
Well, that's marvelous. Thank you, Dina. In fact, tonight we're going to be raising money for the Angel Network. And I don't know if any of you know what the remarkable work that the Angel Network does and how they've really come to the fore during the period of COVID. But they're involved in so many projects, helping people, supporting people, getting food into the townships, doing rape kits and comfort kits to people who've been abused. It's absolutely remarkable. So we're going to be showing you 3 videos throughout this evening to tell you about the work that the Angel Network does. And if it resonates with you, we'd love you to be able to support them and maybe make a donation. So before we begin, Dan, can I ask you to please show us one of the videos about the Angel Network and let people understand just a little of the work that they do.
A group of Sowetans took it upon themselves to walk women from their homes to the nearby transportation hubs. Some wake up at 2 a.m. to get the first wave of women. They also have a uniquely South African call to let the women know they are ready. They trumpet on the vuvuzela to announce their arrival. The women then walk out and are escorted to their taxis and buses. Each of the patrollers are unemployed and have taken up this task to make Soweto a better place for all. Since the group was established years ago, the crime rate has steadily decreased year on year. The Angel Network has donated 200 torches, reflective jackets, whistles, flasks, and beanies to each patroller and would love to provide boots for each squad member. As they walk long distances each day, reliable and comfortable footwear is essential. We would like to provide each of the patrollers with a stipend for food to support their families. I wake up feeling safe when I hear the vuvuzela outside, said Zanele. When I hear the vuvuzela, I think, here comes safety, and they do it for free. When people like this step up and help their community, especially women, we need to continue to encourage them to keep going and show support. It's how change happens.
Angels Network, thank you very much. We've been having a very good, wonderful partnership with you. I really appreciate whatever that you are doing, and I know there's still more where this is coming from. And to those who have given to you to give to us, may they continue to do so. So we really thank you very much. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to the Angel Network, for everything that in fact you do. It is amazing, and a good evening to the approximately 1,300 people busy watching us this evening. I see we have people from all over the world, including Peter, who has joined us from Capri. We have people from all over South Africa, people in Europe, South America, North America, Australia. It's lovely to have you all with us in discussing this incredibly important subject tonight. So to Judge Charisse Wiener, Charisse, I think you are known to so many people. You are a judge of the High Court of South Gauteng. You're an acting judge of the Appellate Division at the moment. You are zooming into Bloemfontein. You are the driving force behind an NGO called Warm the World that knits blankets and gets people waiting in doctors' waiting rooms to knit blankets for people. You are really a great icon of our society and our community. And most importantly of all, you are in fact the second winner of the Jewish Achiever Award, Woman in Leadership Award, and you share that award with someone who a few years later, being Professor Bonita Maisveld, won that award a few years after you. Charisse, thank you so much for helping us with this panel, and thank you. You have a tough night ahead to try get so many views out of so many different people, but most importantly, to leave people with the sense that something can be done and must be done, because the scourge in our society has to end. Women have to be able to walk freely in our streets without fear of attack. Women need to be able to not have to fear rape. Women need to be able to go to their homes and not fear their husbands and their boyfriends and their children. Women have to have their rights protected in this society. So with that, Charisse, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Howie, for all those accolades. I was looking behind me to see who you were talking about. Whilst we negotiate our lives through the COVID pandemic, a highly visible epidemic of gender-based violence continues to affect women and children every day. This scourge continues to sweep through the country despite President Cyril Ramaphosa declaring that femicide was a national crisis in September 2019. On the 17th of June this year, he stated that over the past few weeks alone, no fewer than 21 women and children had been murdered. These numbers have increased since then. In many of the cases, the victims were also raped. Their ages range from 3 months to 89 years. I'm privileged to introduce the many renowned members of our panel to discuss this fraught issue of gender-based violence. Bonita Maisveld is an associate professor at the Wits School of Law. She has been knighted by the French government for her work addressing gender-based violence and is the founder of Lawyers Against Abuse, which offers legal and psychological services to residents of Diepsloot. Bonita, can you describe to us the magnitude of this problem in South Africa?
I think the best way to do it is if you imagine that every person watching, forgive me.
Now we can see.
Everybody, if you can imagine that everybody watching this webinar is in the same room, and 1 in 3 of the women in that room have experienced some form of gender-based violence. Every time you walk into a restaurant, 1 in 3 people in that room, at a minimum, have experienced some form of gender-based violence. And the pervasiveness of the problem is directly, inversely proportionate to the extent to which people talk about it. And we talk about it at a very high level. We have our president who talks about it. And for the first time, really, that we've had such an aggressive response from our national leader, this time probably since Mandela. But we don't talk about it amongst ourselves. A friend of mine recently fell and hurt her eye, and she had a big bruise around her eye. And for 10 days, she works in the health sector, and for 10 days, she was walking around and not a single person asked her if she was all right and what had happened. And that's just not okay. So I think the pervasiveness of the problem is such that you can be sure the next time we are able to, please God, it soon, go out for a Shabbos dinner, 1 in 3 of the women at that dinner has experienced violence, probably by an intimate person in her life.
Okay. Sasha Lee, you are the present Miss South Africa, and you're now an activist in the field of gender-based violence, but you too were a victim of gender-based violence. Can you tell us your story?
So I think many have come to be aware of what my story is, but today I think I'd like to take the opportunity to rather touch on the importance of survivors being affirmed in society. So that being said, I'd like to stress the importance of survivors being believed. Now, having myself had to endure 4 years of sexual abuse from the age of 7, and this instant survival was made possible by my brain's primary function, which I've come to understand in academia, the ability to, suppress the severity of the situation in order for me to survive it. So I'd say that surviving the sexual abuse was not as bad as surviving the aftermath of trauma. So get this, I grew up, I got through it alone with the idea that someday I would liberate many with the story, and I would serve on this platform and live up to the meaning of my name, which is Sasha, Defender of Mankind. But I was blissfully unaware of the psychological implications that this would actually culminate in. And if I might add, not really understanding until this day the magnitude of the fight that I chose. So as Miss South Africa, or as an influencer in this position that I hold, I think it's not only to put forth solutions to the crises that South Africans find ourselves in, but it's also to serve as a voice for those who have yet to find theirs. So I felt that I'm meant to be strong. I'm meant to be a role model in this, because it's not about me, it's about everyone that I represent. But what happens when someone like me is human and loses their voice? Because that has happened. And I don't think any of you out there would have thought that that could be possible, because I sure didn't. And yet I lost my voice a few times because I didn't understand the high degree of the secondary trauma that I would have faced through this platform, due to my inability to isolate or tell the story independently of experiencing basically the feelings I had felt at the time. And I still find myself in this position, losing my voice, but not intentionally. And I think it's because I feel myself still being silenced by society. So I think rather we need to get to a place where we ask South Africa, or the world in fact, where is the honor in asking these questions that make survivors feel like they failed in protecting themselves? And I know you know these questions, the ones where you ask us, what were we wearing? Or you ask us if we had drank anything, or you ask us, why is it that we were out so late? And also, past the social media outrage, past the hashtags that we've created, where is the collective activism channeled towards, restoring the dignity of those who have survived, those who are alive with us today, who often don't feel like they want to be here anymore? So where's your support for those people? Because they don't really feel like living right now, but we don't support them. And on the 9th of August, on the Miss South Africa stage, I think for the first time, I told my story. And it's a story that resonates with many throughout South Africa. It's relevant because every 26 seconds, someone in South Africa is faced with this reality. It's a reality that as we've just heard, 1 in 3 would have experienced in their lifetime. 40% of women, in fact, would have experienced some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. Yet when I spoke up about it, it's as if it was frowned upon. A lot of them asked, why is it that I chose at that particular moment to speak about it? Was it a strategy to win? And I think, back in that moment, I'm like, wow, do you think I went back in my life, said to my 7-year-old self, it's on you to put yourself in a position to be sexually abused so that you could use it as a tool in the future? I find behavior like this on behalf of the public, unfair towards those who have experienced this and those who still experience this today. So I think the takeaway from this is that we need to understand as a society the role that we play in silencing our survivors and being an accessory in this crime. Because in that moment when we're asking these questions, we actually are. But, despite all the noise, I think what's kept me going is the knowledge that my presence on this platform is a future reimagined for many. It represents hope, and it represents the resilience of survivors and the power that we have. So for now, I think my plea with South Africa is to see the call to action in #AmINext, but rather take that focus towards what's next and actively work towards primarily, restoring the dignity of survivors through a multitude of causes that are in play right now, like through the Angel Network that have, together with Penny Stain, created the Rape Comfort Pack.
Thank you, Sashali, for sharing that with us. We're now joined on the panel with Miranda Jordan-Friedman, who I'm sure many of you have heard of. She's the founding director of Women and Men Against Child Abuse. And she has committed herself to fighting for the rights of the child to end the abuse of children in South Africa. We are also joined by 2 psychologists, Buyisile Mqhina, a counseling psychologist and a lecturer at Wits University, who deals with psychosocial and socio-political issues in marginalized communities. Leanne Szabo is a clinical psychologist who deals with trauma and the intersection between psychological dynamics and social issues. And Lisa Vetten, who is also well known in this field, who has worked in the field of violence against women for over 20 years. She's currently a Mellon doctoral candidate at the Wits City Institute, and her PhD seeks to provide a critical history of rape in South Africa. Welcome to all of you. Are we missing Lisa? Well,
yeah, I've just promoted Lisa. I found her in the audience, so Lisa should be joining the panel any second now.
Okay, fine. Miranda, you have spoken about the magnitude of this problem being a societal issue. And underlying that are societal and relational issues that lead to GBV. And we have to explore these in order to find a solution to this. We need to find a solution for the rights, safety, and abuse of children in communities, which is the people you deal with in your work. It's been said that one of the problems is the absence of positive male role models and figures. What is your view on that?
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me on this evening. And I think you're specifically...
We can't really hear you. Can anyone hear her?
Can you hear me?
Now we can, thank you.
Okay, let me put that a little bit closer to me. Right, okay. So I wanted to specifically talk today about how gender-based violence affects literally hundreds of thousands of children in South Africa every year. And this literally starts from the time that they are conceived. And when children are conceived out of a rape and domestic violence, and when they are born, they are almost seen by the mother as an extension of that violence that was committed against them. And as a result, many children that are dumped, that are abused, that are where the role of the mother then becomes relinquished to somebody else, where they may again be harmed, they are really put in harm's way as a result of the violence that was committed, sometimes even before and often before they were born. And something interesting that I wanted to bring up is that children whose mothers were subjected to violence show 3 times as much body inflammation from just before they were born. I also wanted to say that children growing up in the circumstance where they have been born into this kind of a condition have poor attachments. They have poor attachments to their mother, and often maybe no or poor attachments to their father. And children in these circumstances have also poor social means of resolving things, and often resolve things through aggression. A lot of children born in these circumstances also become institutionalized, and there again have a lack of attachment to a specific parental figure. And I think what I really want to say is that when children are hurt, we must remember that hurt children hurt other children and grow up to become adults who hurt other adults. And so basically, we see that whole cycle again beginning. And I think another thing that I wanted to bring up here is that children who witness violence, this is something we've seen at both our clinics, the one in Alexandra and the one in Boksburg. We've seen, especially during COVID, children who are presenting with other problems, as in sexual and physical violence, are also talking about the violence that they are seeing at home. And some research, very new research, has shown us that children who witness violence basically face the same risks to their mental health and learning as if they experienced the violence firsthand. And a very shocking video that was sent to us anonymously, and we had to trace it, was a little girl of 4 years old in a room, and she was standing between her mother and her father, and her father was shouting and moving towards her mother, and she was sort of standing with her hands stretched out, trying to protect her mother, who was eventually pushed and fell, and the child also fell. And I just wonder, you know, the impact of this. Well, I don't wonder, I know the impact of this for a very long time on the child. So I think we really have to look at children pre-born, the fact that children who are unwanted, mothers who are, women who are raped and have children who really are seen as an extension of that violence committed, and what happens to these hundreds of thousands. We know how many women are raped annually in the country. I'll just give you an example. In our clinic, just since January, we have seen close to 600 children. I mean, this is enormous. Not all children have been sexually or physically abused. A lot of neglect has happened as a result of COVID, and a lot of witness to domestic violence. So it's a real, children really need to be looked at in the whole picture when we talk about gender-based violence.
That's tragic. Lucila, Research has shown that while in some cases rapists and murderers might be described as psychopaths, the problem goes deeper. It seems to be one that's defined in terms of a man's belief that they have control over women. Is this one of the issues that you deal with in your practice in regard to marginalized communities?
Thank you so much, Cherise. So in terms of our exploration of gender-based violence within the context of our community, particularly South Africa, known to be a violent society, across the length and breadth truly of hegemonic masculinity, we find a lot of cultural and historical expressions of the role of the man and the role of the woman and the girl child in our society. The first thing, of course, is there's a sense of a patriarchal bargain, and that then gives the entitlement over the female body to say that I assume this role in society, and in exchange, your body becomes my canvas to kind of express the fragile masculinity that I embody as a man. So there's quite a lot that we kind of see. We know that there's historical trauma that comes into the spaces of therapy where clients can recall some of the experiences that they had in childhood, and they can also place the same magnitude of trauma onto their own parents, their mothers particularly. So there's quite a lot that we find. And of course, when we go into these communities, we also find that the ideologies around love and expression and safety and security in our communities are slightly flawed, because there is that whole power dynamic that exists. So you then find that women in our society, in our communities, particularly disenfranchised communities, are not necessarily fully empowered to be able to take a stand, and not empowered to be able to form an autonomy. And they do depend on the men in their lives. And oftentimes when these men are then particularly intimidated or threatened by the role of the woman, or her assuming some kind of independence, there is a tendency then to need to reassert, using violence, your place as a man in the hierarchy of the human structure.
Thank you, Priscilla. Leanne, what goes on in the perpetrator's mind insofar as these power dynamics are concerned?
Thank you, Cherise. And I think it's a really important question, because many of us wonder, how can someone be violent? How can somebody hurt another person who's vulnerable or physically weaker? It seems inhuman, inhumane. And sometimes we're even ambivalent about understanding what goes on in the mind of the perpetrator, because we don't want to excuse it. But I believe it's essential that we do understand what goes on in the mind of the perpetrator, in terms of understanding how we take preventative measures against gender-based violence. So I want to follow on from something Buyisile said about control and a sense of possession of women by men. And Buyisile alluded to how sometimes a man might feel threatened by a woman's independence. I would say that often the omnipotence and dominance of what we call hegemonic masculinity, that typical macho sort of masculinity, compensates for a deep vulnerability and a deep insecurity. And in fact, Garth Stevens and Ursula Lau from WITS conducted a study where they interviewed 12 perpetrators in depth. And many of the perpetrators spoke about how threatened they felt when their partner, these were perpetrators of intimate partner violence. They spoke about how threatened they felt when their partner would come home late, or they would suspect their partner of infidelity. So these controlling, possessive dynamics are a hallmark of abusive people, abusive men. But in this case, there's a sense that if somebody is separate from you, if they're autonomous, they could hurt you, reject you, humiliate you. And we see with men that the fantasy or the reality that you're being betrayed or you're going to lose your partner evokes massive rage and revenge and desire to possess and hurt and make your impact felt, reassert dominance and power. And when we think about this, and now I want to relate to what Miranda said about childhood, nobody likes humiliation and rejection, but most people, many people, find ways to tolerate it. But if you haven't had a bank of good experiences in your childhood in terms of attachment to important figures, feeling loved, feeling cared for, if you've been exposed to extensive trauma and broken families, broken attachment, violence, you feel so small and powerless inside, and your omnipotent masculinity compensates for that, that you in fact are unable to soothe yourself or to mentalize and think through the distress that you're feeling, and you end up acting that out. Now, this is no excuse. I think that what happens with men in this situation is that they adopt ideas around men and women that are out there in the external world to help them cope with these internal feelings, ideas that they have a right to the woman, that she's not allowed to say no, that she is his possession, or even a child who should listen to him and obey him. So men are co-opting these ideas about masculinity to try to cope with their internal distress that they're experiencing. What do we do about this? I know we're not on solutions yet, but I just want to mention that the importance of early intervention in terms of children at risk of violence, whether they have witnessed violence, as Miranda said, that puts people at risk of perpetrating, and I'm sure Luke will talk more about diversion programs, how children can be brought into programs that can help to create some kind of holding structure for the child to process difficult emotions and feel held emotionally. There's also the issue of absent fathers and what role the father plays in creating a boundary or a sense of being protected, a positive male role model, and in general, a holding social structure that helps a person to become socialized in a positive way. Witnessing violence, if there is a present father who is violent against the maternal figure, can also lead to what psychoanalysts have called identification with the aggressor. So if you witness violence, you may subconsciously feel that it's better to be like the perpetrator than to be a helpless victim. And that creates an imprint on the mind that can lead to perpetrate violence. So those are some of the dynamics that are elucidated with regards to this, that make this very difficult issue a little bit clearer and show how important it is to catch this issue early, so that men can be socialized in a way that they find a way to cope with their vulnerability, rather than disown it or try to become omnipotent, and then when they feel humiliated or rejected, they have no tools to cope with it. So that's some thoughts, and I'm sure we'll hear lots more. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. Lisa, I think you're having a problem with your video, but you can hear us, and we will be able to hear you. Irene Charnley, a South African businesswoman on News 24 today, brought up the subject that women should do their part in challenging GBV. She said it is important to empower women by giving them opportunities to become economically independent, because this is the first step in achieving real woman empowerment. Patriarchal attitudes towards the role of women often make violence an acceptable norm in society, and we as a community of women then sadly conform to. What are your views in this regard?
Well, I think Irene has raised a whole lot of very complicated issues. The first is, I think that at a fairly superficial level, it's very true that women's economic dependence on men places them in a position of vulnerability. But I want to complicate her idea somewhat, because I think one of the challenges that face us in South Africa is the fact that we tend to put out our solutions without grappling with their complexities. And by not grappling with their complexities, we don't actually understand why these things work and don't work. So I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between economy and violence. And I think it's important because thus far we've been talking very much at the level of the individual, our personal upbringings, our psychology and the like. But we are also people who are embedded within society which has a particular structure. And economic structure plays a very significant role in what our life choices are going to be. Are we going to be the kind of child who lives under circumstances where there will be neglect, and we may not have access to social services that look after us and help us address the kind of neglect that we've experienced as a child? I think economy also structures what are the range of options that are available to you. So now Irene Charney was highlighting economic empowerment, but I think it's important to problematize what she was saying in a couple of ways. The first is, I think when we talk about gender-based violence, we talk about it as an undifferentiated phenomenon. It's actually an umbrella term for a whole range of different kinds of violence. So I'm not sure economic empowerment is going to do very much to help women stop being raped, for instance. But it is very significant, I think, for women who are in abusive relationships. So economic empowerment, things that would help them become less dependent and less entrapped with their partners would be very helpful. But I think, again, let's complicate that a little bit further. Firstly, to start with, not all women necessarily want to work. They would like to stay home. They would like to look after their children. They take pleasure in that. And we should not dismiss their choices in that regard. But that does put them in a position of economic dependence. Do we call them the dupes of patriarchy for wanting to do that? Or do we look at ways in which we can support them and actually elevate and recognize the importance and the significance of what we might call social reproduction, or looking after the next generation, ensuring it continues forward? Then let's look at what it is that is actually offered to women for economic empowerment programs. I work quite a lot with shelters, and here it becomes very apparent. Probably about 2/3 of the women who go to shelters are unemployed, and between a quarter to a half have no form of income, not even a child support grant. And I think you see the group of women who are between about 45 to 60 facing particular difficulties because they're too old for child support grants. Their children are now big, but they're too young for a pension. And they're not particularly desirable to employers in terms of employing them. So what do we do about that group of women? Because it's also not realistic to expect everyone to become an entrepreneur. So I think the challenge to your audience and to anyone else who thinks about these issues is, what are the kinds of programs that we need to develop in order to be able to assist women? Because it's all very well to say they should become economically empowered, but who is presenting those programs to them? I think the second issue that tends to come up when you work with women in this respect is, where is the childcare? If you want them to be going out on skills training programs and those sorts of things, where is the childcare to enable them to do so? So I think, what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way is that it's easy to say economic empowerment, but we've got to break it down into what are the different components of it, who is responsible for it. And let's talk about another issue, is even if you get women into work, they still often don't earn enough to be able to leave their partners anyway. Very often a man is not necessarily somebody you love and deeply desire. He may be your survival mechanism. So the point is, how do we also address a gender pay gap so that when women do work, they also earn enough to be able to leave and not be able to end up being economically dependent, even though they do have a job. And I think the last thing we need to talk about is there are women who are economically dependent, who we never talk about. And those are your middle class or women who own their own businesses who still get abused. And very often there's a very negative attitude towards that category of women. There's the assumption that if you are earning money, you could leave. The fact that you don't leave is very suspect. What else are you getting out of that relationship that you don't choose to leave? So I think it would be useful to start nuancing just what role the economics of domestic violence does play in relation to the way we judge women, to the choices that we assume that they can and can't make, and to the nature of the help that we offer them. Thanks.
Yes, I think it is a as you say, a much more complex and complicated problem, because there don't seem to be many alternatives presented to women who are being abused in their homes. So perhaps that we can deal with in some of the solutions that should be made available. Benita, I was reading today that Vusi Thembekwayo, a renowned businessman, spoke about that some men defend themselves and say they've never abused a woman, but they know that there are many men who do so while they look the other way, making them complicit. And he criticized family members, friends, and colleagues who, what he called, negotiate women back into abusive relationships. Is this a pervasive problem? It seems to be.
Yes, it's a pervasive problem, and it also highlights, I think, what was coming across a little bit in what Lisa was saying, is that you can't distinguish gender-based violence from gender-based discrimination. In other words, the harm of gender-based violence is so bad in part because women are still seen in a garb that we thought we had ripped off our society. We think we're an egalitarian society and we think we're an equal society, but there's still this ability and an assumption to speak about women and to women in a way that we would never think about doing in relation between men. So for example, many years ago, I was in London in a very Jewish community, and I was sitting at a coffee shop. And at the table next to mine were two young men, they must have been in their early 20s, sitting with two young boys, probably about 12 or 13. And they were all, they were chatting and joking. And I heard one of them say, "What do you call a woman with a black eye?" And they laughed and said, "What?" And he said, "A good start." And what do you call a woman with two black eyes? A very good start. Much to the horror of my friends and the group with whom I was having a coffee, I got up and I went over to the table and I said, "Forgive me, but I really, would you mind if I sat down and just comment on what you've done? You've made a joke about one of the most serious forms of death, causes of death and disability against women in the world. Gender-based violence causes more death and disability than AIDS, TB, and malaria combined for women between the ages of 18 and 44. You've made a joke about something that is considered to be one of the longest standing low-level civil wars that takes place globally. But worse than any of that, you've made this joke in front of two young boys and you've normalized and sanitized violence against women to them. The complicity that comes through the perpetuation of the infantilization, the diminution, and the objectification of women is as indelibly important a contributor to gender-based violence as the perpetrator himself. So is complicity an issue? Complicity is 50% of the problem. And if we were to start calling each other out, not only in the extreme instances, which I hope people would, but if we were to start at the very level of checking ourselves in the way that we speak about each other, the way that we think that because of a person's sex, we are entitled to speak about them in a manner that is derogatory, in a manner that we would never think about speaking to one another based on race, for example, at least not publicly. Until we get to that point, we are going to have a level of complicity that sustains the individual perpetrator.
Yes. Lisa, would you like to come back in there and give further comment on that aspect?
Sorry, on which aspect, Cherise?
On the complicity of men and the way in which these kind of jokes are used amongst men, and as Benita's case, in front of their children, young boys, and how this permeates through the society, and therefore can we expect anything better from the children of these sorts of men who are behaving in such a fashion?
I mean, I always think, I'm always reminded of Freud, who talked about how jokes were often sometimes an unconscious manifestation of hostility. So I think a lot of what passes as funny joke against women is actually precisely that, merely a way of trying to disguise and hide that particular kind of hostility towards women. I mean, I think when we try and understand why this continues, we need to look at it at a range of different dimensions. Clearly, there's the intrapsychic, which I think the psychologists from the panel have started to talk about, that level of the individual. But there's how that then engages with what boys grow up and see around them. What is it their friends tell them? How is it that their fathers are behaving? When they go to school, do they see anything different? do they see any kinds of alternative role models? And I raised that because some years ago we did some work at schools, and in we went there with all our, oh, boys can be nurses and girls can be managers. And the 13-year-olds looking at us and saying, I don't know any man who is a nurse. A nurse is a woman. So I think one also has to look at what role models are realistically out there for people to look at, rather than us presenting things that perhaps have no relevance or that people haven't seen in their day-to-day lives. So I think there's that level of the individual, the family, the community, but I think also how that then interacts and is buttressed by things like the law. So I think South Africa has done quite a lot in terms of trying to dismantle the more obvious ways in which law supported masculine entitlement. For example, in 1993, it finally became a crime for a husband to rape his wife. But, you know, legal change doesn't necessarily result in societal change. And I think after some 24 years of our constitution, we're starting to realize that it's one thing to have something on a piece of paper, but it's quite another thing for people to have to live it. This is why I would like to go back to some of the things I was saying earlier about social structures, is that we often demand that people change, but we don't necessarily put the supports in place that will enable them to change, because very often a man might recognize that he has a problem. Is there a psychological service or any kind of service nearby where he can go to? No. If he says, I am struggling and I am having difficulty, will his friends support him, or they're going to laugh him and say, what kind of man lets his girlfriend or wife push him around? So he doesn't get any help there, but nonetheless, he decides to persist. It may mean that he needs to entirely leave his community and his friends and start all over again somewhere else in order not to get hooked back into those same kinds of patterns. So I think when we look at asking people to change, we can't only think about an individual level. It's how do you put those supports in place that sustain change? So yes, it's important that men call each other out and do whatever that is, but they also need to do much more in terms of, if somebody has decided to behave differently, what do you do to try and encourage it? If someone has spent their entire life being surrounded and has normalized that you hit and slap and push and shove in order to get your way, to be heard and not to get hurt in turn, you've got to show them in very concrete ways how you unlearn that and how you learn to still assert yourself, still get what you want to say across without having to do it in a violent and aggressive way. And I must say that's something we are not very good at in South Africa. Is we're very good at telling people what not to do, but we don't show them how to behave differently. And I think finally, we should also not forget that amongst men who have been abused and who've seen their mothers abused are sometimes some of the best activists to go and speak to other men, because they haven't forgotten what it was like to see that being done to their mothers. And they may even have tried to intervene. So I think it's useful to also try to bring those men into the conversation, because they can be effective in saying to other men who also grew up like that, but haven't stopped the hitting, how it is that they've managed to learn to behave differently.
Yes, well, hopefully we'll be chatting with Luke and others a little later on ways in which these sorts of societal changes can take place. We have been running polls while we've had this panel, and I must impress upon you that all the polls are anonymous, so please don't worry about your name being bandied about. And the first quick
just launched the first poll, so it's up on the screen, and the audience is voting right now.
Right. So the first issue is, how important should ending gender-based violence be as an issue in South Africa? What best describes your view? It should be the most important issue. It is important, but not as important as crime, housing, and unemployment. It is important, but it's just part of normal South African crime. It's a bit over-exaggerated as an issue, and don't know.
So we will end the polling in another 15 seconds and then share the results with you and the panel, Cherise.
Okay. Can we also, in the meanwhile, see what questions have come up from the audience that might be important to put to our panel?
So the results of the panel are that 77% of the people watching this evening believe that it is the most important issue we should address in South Africa today. 21% believe it is important, but not as important as crime, housing, and unemployment. 2% of people say it's important, but it's just part of normal crime, and no one believes any of the others.
Okay. Lisa, can I bring you in again on this? Because it's an interesting point. We chatted yesterday briefly about whether it's gender-based violence or whether South Africa is just a very violent society. And it was quite interesting on the poll that a lot of people did not see this as simply another element of the crime that we experience in South Africa.
I think it's important to understand violence as being gendered. When I say violence is gendered, what I mean is that whether you're a man or a woman will affect the kind of violence that you experience, and it will affect how you become involved in violence, your likelihood of being a perpetrator of different forms of violence, and how society will respond to you. So all violence, in my opinion, is gendered. I think just to use we typically think about it as being male on female, but I'll give you a different example to give an illustration of what I mean. Let's say we have a couple who've gone out to have a drink, and there is a man walks by and he looks at the one man's girlfriend. That man immediately gets up and says, "Stop looking at my girlfriend, leave her alone." He's clearly operating from a gendered masculine role and now wants to become violent, abusive, etc., in order to feel that he is a man who is owning his property. And so he might assault that man. You can clearly see gender is at work, and ideas around masculinity and how one proves one's masculinity, even though the victim in that particular circumstance might be a man. So I think when we use gender, we shouldn't just use gender as a means of identifying whether the victim is male or female, but we should also use it to try and understand what are the dynamics that are driving this kind of violence? What are the ideas around masculinity and femininity here? So I think if we take another example, like murder in South Africa, men in South Africa are probably murdered at about 5 times the rate in which women are, but they're murdered under very different circumstances. So men don't have to worry about when they go home if their wife or their girlfriend is going to put a knife in them while they're sleeping. They don't have that worry. But we know that probably half, if not more, women in South Africa, when they die, that is precisely how they die. Men also don't have to worry about walking home, being raped and then murdered by a gang. I was looking at recent data, rape murders for boys and men make up approximately 1% of their murders, but they make, for girls under the age of about 14, they make up a quarter of their murders. So I think that's why it's important to understand how violence is gendered, whether you're male or female affects whether you're going to be a perpetrator, because I think if you go and look at our prisons, you can see who has the monopoly on violence in South Africa. And so I think when we want to talk about the relationship between gender and violence, we have to understand what is its relationship between what you become a victim of and whether you're likely to become a perpetrator. Because if we flip that for a bit, I think the other difficulty is women, and I spent a number of years working with women in prison who had used violence. And because we so seldom associate violence with women, that particular group had a very, very difficult time being accepted because what they had done was seen as being so stigmatized and so unwomanly. So I hope if we look at gender more broadly than just the identity of who's the victim, it will help us to understand a little bit more about how we think about violence in South Africa and the specific forms it takes.
Yes. You see that perhaps you can come in here just before we go to our poll results. What Lisa has been mentioning now about the role of men and the way in which they act, it's become a bit of an overused phrase, but with toxic masculinity, do you find that is it's directed both at women and at other men?
Absolutely. So when we look at the idea or the concept of toxic masculinity, is that there has to be a dominance over women and also a dominance over other men as well. So the idea of needing to assert your role and needing to preserve your power over others is something that we find becomes quite the challenge when we are unpacking gender-based violence. And all the panelists that have spoken have noted a number of things that are quite important in understanding what then equips and enables some of the men who participate in intimate partner violence and other forms of violence. And I think it becomes, it's such a complex subject matter to engage with, and it's certainly something that we need to constantly bring in conversation to critically unpack what we are witnessing. We know that the way in which it is manifested in different communities is varied. We know that for urbanized communities, perhaps it finds its own expression, and in poorer communities, there are other cultural as well as other forms of belief systems that kind of locate women in this helpless role. So we find that over the generations, there are certain ideologies and there are certain ways and perspectives of life that young girls are being socialized into and young boys continue to be socialized into. So it certainly is a challenge that we face, and it goes back to, you know, the conversation around what are we speaking about? What is the conversation? What are we doing to empower young boys? What are we doing to empower young girls? What are we doing for the woman who remains in such a toxic relationship? And what are we doing also for the communities that have been plagued with gender-based violence and have had to really be desensitized to the manner because it is part of their everyday reality?
Yes, well, Lucila will be back with us later when we talk about certain programs and solutions that we hope can help to not eradicate it, because I mean that would be aiming for the stars, but can, in an attempt to reduce the amount of violence in our communities. Miranda, can you come in here and just give us some understanding of what happens with these young children and girls who have witnessed abuse or have been abused, or have been abused themselves, and boys, and how does that affect the way in which they will grow up into teenagers and into adults?
Thank you. Well, I think, you know, I'm going to go back to what Leanne was saying, Leanne Szabo, just regarding children who grow up in this, and we see the girl children often becoming victims and the boy children becoming perpetrators. But also when we look at learning disabilities, when we look at the way they look at resolving conflict, you know, and you know, the huge amount of therapy, and Lisa touched on children who've been neglected, children who've been abused, but I think she specifically mentioned children being neglected, is that also the resources in this country, there are so few resources that provide long-term therapy for children, and, you know, even and particularly affordable, or, you know, the few of us who can provide completely free therapy is, and which is needed at different stages. And when I talked about what happens with the boy child and young boy juvenile perpetrators, this is a huge problem currently. We do not have enough diversion programs. In fact, we are sitting with a massive problem, both in areas around our Boksburg clinic, which works with the Katlehong, Germiston FCSs, as well as in Alexandra, where there really is, there's almost no really official programs that we can work with these children. I mean, Luke has worked again, we'll bring him in and he will bring, he's got other alternative programs to work with. But the reality is what is happening to these children who start with minor crimes and then these escalate into huge crimes. I mean, just about 2 months ago, we had 2 young boys who drowned another child. They're 10 and 11, and they have been shunted from pillar to post, because what do we do with these 2 young boys? So they went from we couldn't work with them. We sent them to back to Department of Social Development. So they are around and not and will probably develop into criminals that will carry on committing other offences unless they are diverted into proper rehab programs. Yeah.
Okay, one of the questions we've been asked is, sexual assault has rapidly increased during lockdown. Rape crisis centres are overwhelmed with calls, and the government needs to be focused on a way to protect women now. I think one of the questions that this raises is, has sexual assault rapidly increased now during COVID lockdown? Or is it as rife as it normally is, or is there an increase? And Lisa, you seem to have done some research on this topic.
Yes, Cherise. So if we look at under the current circumstances, we have to rely on the police statistics with all their flaws. But I think some of what they are pointing to does seem fairly logical. So firstly, the one thing we have seen go down very significantly is rape. And that you would expect, because under stages 4 and 5 of the lockdown, movement was severely prohibited and proscribed. I mean, you ran the risk of being beaten up quite badly by the police if you were caught moving around, for instance. So because a lot of rape occurs in social settings, when people are out socializing in parties, or they're walking to and from work or to the shops or to parties, whatever it may be, because the opportunities for that were diminished, you can see that reflected in the rape statistics. Trying to figure out what's happening in relation to domestic violence is a lot more difficult, because you can also see that the number of cases reported to the police of domestic violence also decreased. However, I think we have to take into account the fact that, firstly, there was, as we know, 11 men and a woman were killed by the police during the lockdown for breaking lockdown regulations, by the sounds of it. And that was, I would say, a very, very severe disincentive to be going out and asking for help from the police. There were also quite a number of complexities which have come in from some of the cases that I've been assisting with, is that women wanted to leave, but they couldn't get permits to go from one province to the other to return to their families, for instance. So I think that wasn't necessarily looked at. Students, for instance, who were sent home from university, where they had a great deal of violence in their households, whether it was from another family member or their fathers, or watching their fathers assault their mothers, asked if they could please come back to res, but the reses were closed. So I think I'm giving you those examples just to give you a sense of the fact that we didn't think through enough of what happened and the kind of help that needed to happen. And then the last thing I want to just raise is, President Ramaphosa raised the fact that there had been 21 women's recorders having died within probably the start of June, when we moved into stage 3 of the lockdown. But if you look at the police's figures, those first 6 weeks under stage 4 and 5, 1,072 people died. That was still about half the number. But who were those 1,072 people? How many were women? How many were men? Under what circumstances did they die? Why are we so uncurious about them? So there's a part of me that wonders. We talked about the spike in murders that occurred after June, but was the spike in attention, or was it actually a spike in the numbers? And then I think the question we have to ask ourselves, the hard question we have to ask ourselves is, why is it that some victims attract our attention and some victims don't? And you can see this reflected in the newspaper. Even after all this outcry, there are women who have names and who have selfies, and there are women who never become anything more than a woman's body was found at the side of the road. We never even know who she was.
Yeah. There've been quite a few questions posed in regard to women asking, what do you suggest one does when a mother in the home actually encourages violence against her daughter by her son? And this is obviously part of the problem in certain communities where people are living together and the son is regarded as the male figure in the house, and the mother, for whatever reason, probably because she feels powerless, doesn't intervene when there is violence between her son and her daughter. What does one even suggest to people like that? Miranda, does that, can you come in there?
Sharita, actually was wondering if Leanne probably could answer that better than I could.
Leanne,
right
can we
now.
hear from you? Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay, Leanne. We're talking here about sort of intimate partner violence on the one hand, which can happen in a home, but there is also violence within the home between siblings, a male and a female, and where the son is not discouraged from exercising the power and control that he has over.
Are you asking what one would say to that family or to that mother?
Perhaps, but I'm going to stop you there, Leanne, just before you answer, because we're going to bring Sepati in here, who is an activist from Soweto. And she has, in fact, been subject to this sort of situation in her home, where violence against her has not been discouraged. Sepati, can you tell us your stories? We know that you have certain legal proceedings and we don't want those to prejudice anything, but tell us what has happened, because this is something that has gone back for many years in your family.
Yes, Cherise, I was listening to you now as you were asking the other lady, and I was thinking, why don't you just ask me? Because you're taking exactly what I've gone through. You know, it's not funny, really. I'm just laughing because we laugh. Even
it's a tragic laugh.
Yes. I would like to say the problem with me, it has been growing up in a big family. At home, my mom we were about 11 siblings. We are now 10. I'm number 8. And there's about 4 boys and 7 girls. So growing up is like you grow up with your brothers and your sisters, but siblings rival, it's something that we all experience. But the sad thing was with me, it is like I think I grew up having friends, you know, as a girl as opposed to a boy, and whenever there was an argument or whatever was going on, I would just stand up for myself. But I was immediately told that you are a girl, this is a boy, he will beat you. So I couldn't get.
Sorry, I think we're losing Sepati there. Perhaps we'll come back to her. Leanne, in the interim, while we wait for Sepati to get back with us and perhaps adjust the volume that she has on her link. Leanne, what does one do in such a situation? Okay. What does one advise?
I think just a few comments. I think that one of the issues being identified here is how masculine privilege is perpetuated in the home. And sometimes they say that women can be, the worst misogynists in perpetuating this idea that the boy child is prized. And when we look at that mother, she probably struggles to value her own femininity and her own self as a woman, and then sees her girl child as also inferior and perpetuates that by privileging the boy child and seeing the boy child as prized. And I think that Lisa said something really, really interesting. We've come up against a contradiction where some boys witness violence and perpetuate that violence or repeat that violence, while other boys might become activists against it. So what we find is that if you a famous psychoanalyst, Selma Freyberg, wrote a paper called Ghosts in the Nursery. And she spoke about how if you've been traumatized as a child, you may repeat that trauma and hurt somebody else. Or if you become aware of the trauma and you work through the hurt, you may want to help others and repair because you know what that feels like. So this mother was probably treated as inferior as a woman or as a girl child, and is then perpetuating that to her own girl children, unaware or out of touch with the hurt she felt as a child, because if she truly got in touch with that, she wouldn't do that to her own daughter. So the capacity to protect another girl comes with the sense of that a girl is worth protecting. So what kind of advice can one give? It's really difficult to offer a quick fix. I think Miranda really spoke to the lack of therapeutic services in this country. If we were living in a setting like the UK where the NHS offers broad-based psychological services, we could identify families at risk and bring them in for some kind of therapeutic process where the mother could remember what happened to her and confront those wounds and not to perpetuate that on her daughter. So that's the intra-psychic stuff. But as Lisa said, it's also social. It's about this masculine privilege. Just like we talk about white privilege, there's masculine privilege. I've had a patient say to me, people say, if your husband doesn't drink and beat you, he's a good find. You know, so there's this idea that just by virtue of being a man, you deserve certain adulation. And that is an attitude that's perpetuated in society by men and women. So that's
okay. I'm going to stop you there, Leanne. If we're just going to go back to Sepati while we've got her back online. Sepati, if you could continue with your story, but speak a little louder because we were unable to hear you very well last time.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit. You need to speak a bit louder. Maybe go closer to your.
Cherise, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's a bit better.
Okay. I'll just start from the beginning. Am I not too loud? Because now
no, it's perfect now. It's much better.
Okay. So I was saying that in my family, I was raised like within a lot of siblings and boys and girls. So I don't know whether it was because I felt very confident as a young girl and I would just like stand up for myself. But I was told very earlier on, when you stand up to your brother, he will beat you. And that's just not a unique situation in my home. It was something that was happening within our neighborhood. So my take in this whole gender-based violence is that it's how the boy child is raised. And it's the vicious circle that when I look into my family, because there was no father figure, my elder brother was our father, and he had his fair share of doing the gender-based violence, but he did it in a very secret way where you couldn't even witness it. But the problem is the boys and my brothers that were raised in the very same family, they watched it happen from the elder brother to the next brother and the younger brother. He mimicked the same thing. And what I witnessed is that as a boy, when you see it happening, you think it's correct. They witness it on the street. Boys were given the opportunity to like be masculine, and you will tell the next girl on the street, if they don't want to talk to you, you have every right to beat them. It was normal. I grew up in that era, but it's fortunately for me, because I don't know whether I was a girl who just didn't accept being bullied by boys. I always stood up for myself, but unfortunately at home I couldn't, because I was always reprimanded that he is a boy who will beat you. Up to this day, I still see it happening right in the very.
Okay, sorry, Sepati, we're losing you again a bit, so we'll have to try and get you back. Lisa, Leanne, it's what you were saying though, that there's this, it's the way children are raised, and they're raised the way their fathers were raised or their mothers were raised, and it permeates then through generation to generation. And perhaps when we go on to our next topic, which is before, we've got a few more things to discuss, but then we will go on to our next topic on solutions to these tragic situations. We will see what Luke has to say and look at what the president has recommended in the latest statements that he's made. So we're now going to have because we're talking about what happens in communities, we ask the question, and it's often asked in very many communities, but we're going to ask the question to Roseanne. We seem to believe that there is no gender-based violence in the Jewish community. Well, I don't believe it, but the community would like to believe that. You were a victim of gender-based sexual assault by a member of our community, a medical professional. And what occurs in a lot of communities, and I think must occur largely in the Jewish community, is what's called the imperative of silence, that one shouldn't talk about this. Can you tell us about your experience in this regard?
Yes, thanks, Cherise. So yes, there is a pervasive view that abuse does not occur in the Jewish community. Since I've been involved with Kolenu, I often get asked or get told, Jewish husbands don't beat their wives, Jewish parents don't abuse their children, abuse doesn't happen in the Jewish community. And unfortunately, the reality, and the sad reality, is that abuse is alive and well in the Jewish community, and that our community, as well as Jewish communities across the world, are not immune to abuse. So if I had to talk to my own personal story, and it's really the background to why Wendy Robertson, Wendy Hendler, and myself started Kolenu, was that we were both victims of sexual abuse by a medical professional in our community. And we were adults, and we were groomed, and we were manipulated by somebody who we put our ultimate trust in. And even when we realized what had happened to us, I know, speaking for myself, it was months and months of agonizing over what to actually do about it, and still wanting to believe in the good of this person because they were a member of our community, and how could this be happening? And once the decision was made to actually report, and at the end of the day, it was just 3 of us that eventually pressed charges, we had a lot of support, but at the same time, there was a lot of backlash, and there was a lot of intimidation by prominent community members to drop the case, with threats of dire consequences to us and our families if we didn't drop the case. The day before the hearing, we received death threats, and even though they were baseless death threats, you know, you get a death threat, it's pretty scary. And we went to that hearing with a bodyguard. You know, we were called hysterical women with nothing better to do. We were on a witch hunt. We need to calm down. And it was a very, very, very difficult time for us. But because our main objective at the end of the day was to make sure that this did not happen to one other person, we pushed through. And we went through with the hearing, and the consequences were really, you know, even though we got guilty verdicts, the actual sentence was really weak, and we appealed
Well,
that.
this was at the Health Professions Council. Yes. There hasn't been a criminal trial as yet. Is that correct?
Not as yet, yes.
Yes. And there were many women involved in this. How many complainants were there?
Well, at the end of the day, I don't know the exact number, but just 3 of us at the end of the day ended up laying
Giving
forth
evidence.
charges and giving
But
evidence.
there were many more who just didn't come forward for for those reasons that you've referred to.
Yes.
I think there was something like, was it 12 or 14 women that were involved?
I'm not exactly sure of the number, but around there, yes.
Yes.
And
Okay. Thanks, Roseanne.
Okay.
Sorry, just continue.
Okay, so just to say that the reason we started Colanus was because through this process, we wanted to be able to provide a space for community members to come forward in an anonymous and confidential way to feel safe to report abuse, you know, and that has really been our objective. And to date, we've taken almost 300 cases ranging from domestic violence, child abuse, and really, I think our community has come a long way in terms of reporting perpetrators, but at the same time, I think that our community needs to do better. You know, there's still the tendency to want to sweep things under the carpet. There's still the tendency to want to deal with things internally. You know, in days gone by, it doesn't happen so much anymore, but in days gone by, we would want to put that perpetrator on a plane and send him to another country while another country is sending their perpetrators here. So I really, you know, wish to encourage people to report, because we need to create a community that supports victims and not perpetrators. And if we don't support victims and encourage them to come forward, the perpetrators are just left unchecked to continue perpetrating these terrible crimes.
Thank you, Roseanne, for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're now going to see a quick video from the Angel Network on the remarkable work that they're doing with Penny Stain, with rape kits and comfort packs being handed out in rape crisis centers around Gauteng.
The Angel Network donated 240,000 Rand for rape comfort packs. COVID-19 is a pandemic. We've had a pandemic of sexual violence and abuse of men, women, and children in this country for many years. The Rape Comfort Pact is something that we can do as individuals within communities to give a moment of dignity to each one of those whose lives have been shattered. Over 3,500 rape comfort packs have gone out to police stations, to clinics, to rape clinics, to various hospitals, and many NGOs within the country who work in this very dark space. We all can do something. We can donate a rape comfort pack to give a woman, a man, a child, a boy or a girl, dignity for a moment.
Thank you for the wonderful work that you do, Glyn Wellman and the Angel Network in this and many other fields throughout South Africa. We have some sponsors that we'd like to thank for their sponsorship. Firstly, we're indebted to Secura, who has co-sponsored tonight's Zoom broadcast and associates its brand with this important issue of gender-based violence. thank you, Sakura, for providing this sort of service, not only to women who've suffered gender-based violence, but to all people who are suffering from crime that is committed throughout South Africa. We are now joined by Livia Jazreel. She's going to tell us just what her life has been like since she was 12 years old, when she was one of the victims of the tennis professional Bob Hewitt. Thank you for joining us, Olivia,
Thank you.
and
Hi.
sharing this with us.
Thank you. My journey began in 2010 when I tried to commit suicide, mainly because of my belief of worthlessness. And we worked out that it went back to when I met Hewitt when I was about 10 years old. And he recruited me pretty soon after that and began grooming me when I was about 11 years old. Hewitt raped me when I was 12 years old. And I, along with many, many others I know now, were silenced, we were ignored, and I was personally rubbished by my mom when I tried to tell her what he had done to me. And as a result of that, for many, many years, I lived in silence, as did all of us. After a long and very public battle, which, you know, for all intents and purposes, I never ever thought that we would ever see the inside of a courtroom. And, you know, with the support of Women and Men Against Child Abuse and an amazing, amazing legal team, we managed to get a conviction in 2015. And that was 35 years after he raped me. The conviction came despite people rubbishing us, slandering us, my own parents testifying against me, calling me a liar. And I think that was the most traumatic day of my life. The actual trial was also worse than the actual event when I was 12 years old. Hewitt was given a 6-year sentence for raping me as a 12-year-old. In 2016, things got so bad for me, I had to legally change my name. And the reason for this was I was told I was unemployable because of what I had done. We had gone through a very public case and I was deemed to be a troublemaker. Hewitt eventually went into prison after being convicted in 2015. In 2016, he went to prison. I had 2 years of peace. And in September 2018, I received an SMS to say that he was applying for parole. I went into a complete state of PTSD. I had several meltdowns. Having said that, we managed to get that parole application, which he eventually changed into a sentence conversion. We managed to get that overturned. And he had to reapply for parole in 2019. I spent an entire year preparing for the parole hearing, which would take place in 2019. And I found out a week before we were due to see him for parole, that he had actually been granted parole. This again highlighted how just bad the system is and how it doesn't support victims. We had to put up a huge fight again, and we managed to get the parole put onto review, and it was overturned. And after all the secondary trauma that we endured from 2018 until March this year, he was granted parole and left prison in April. Hewitt was given essentially 3 years for my life sentence that he gave me. He took it upon himself to give me a life sentence. He got 3 years. Sasha Lee highlighted earlier on the whole being silenced. Hewitt continues to try and silence me. He has recently tried to obtain a protection order, not a protection order, a High Court interdict to silence me. About 2 weeks ago, we received notification that he had withdrawn this. But, you know, I'm going to go back to the parole hearing, and this is something that we don't talk about. You know, we talk about our abuse, we talk about the justice system up until when we go to court, and if we get a conviction. I was summoned down to the parole hearing, which was nothing short of a complete insult to my intelligence and my integrity. I was verbally abused by Hewitt. I was verbally abused by his advocate. And I only found out after the hearing that he had his daughter-in-law sitting in the hearing as well. I was not allowed to have any support other than my attorney in the room with me, despite us having requested and sent names of people who were going to attend with me. In fact, Luke Lamprecht flew down to attend the hearing with me. The whole system is so flawed. Hewitt was given parole, not because he's accountable, not because he's sorry for ruining my life, not because he's taken ownership of what he did. He was granted parole because he went to a few anger management classes and he's old.
Olivia, can I just stop you there? And what we want to ask the audience and what arises from this is this conspiracy of silence to protect perpetrators.
Yes.
And that is what you've experienced. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's the perpetrator who is being protected either through silence, that people don't want to talk about it, don't want you to talk about it, and discourage others from talking about it. And this is something that permeates throughout the entire experience of rape and gender-based violence. So we're going to have that poll right now, and we'll come back to you once we have some of the answers in that poll. The poll is now going live.
The poll will be up for another 20 seconds, and then we'll end the poll then, and you'll be able to see the results coming in. So 10 more seconds. If you haven't voted yet, please vote now. We'll close in exactly 5 seconds.
Perhaps we can use this break, Howie, to talk about the other sponsor of tonight's panel event. We are encouraged that Mofenyi Advisory, which has been formed by 2 young men who have chosen to stand up against gender-based violence and support efforts to eradicate it.
So Cherise, we are so grateful to Mofenyi Advisory, because after more than a decade of coaching young athletes and young adults in life skills and wellness, Daniel Ackerman and Thabo Motsumi founded Mofenyi Advisory. Their mission is to help individuals and teams to not only overcome challenges, but to realize a better version of themselves by working with you to create a structure that is dedicated to you and your lifestyle. The aim to empower you to transform your aspirations into achievable goals through a holistic approach to all aspects of mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, and interpersonal wellness. Their vision is to change our future by impacting young lives to understand their value, their purpose, and ultimately how to apply themselves effectively as leaders within the communities. So please go to www.mofenyiadvisory.co.za. I'll spell that for you. It's MOFENYIADVISORY. We'll post it in the chat as well. to find out more, and you can contact one of these extraordinary lifestyle and wellness coaches. And Cherise, you've clearly done a remarkable job, because one of these lifestyle coaches is in fact your son, Daniel Ackerman, and he's someone to be so enormously proud of.
Thank you, I am. I think what we're going to do, Howie, now is, because one of the things that we want to work on in the next panel, and we'll come back to both Olivia and this poll then, is the ways in which we can tackle the scourge of gender-based violence. So what is shown here is that we need to identify and expose gender-based violence perpetrators. 87% of people feel that. And perhaps that's one of the ways in which we can enter into our next panel discussion. I'd like to introduce Luke Lamprecht, who is the Advocacy Manager of Women and Men Against Child Abuse and the founder of Fight with Insight. He's an expert consultant on child protection and development and sexual abuse and toxic masculinity. We'll also be joined by Sipho Marima, who is founder of the Barefoot Warrior and associated with an organization called Women for Change. We will also welcome back some of the other panelists who have spoken before. Luke, a young journalist called Bombeleni Mavunza, wrote in an article recently, with such passion, she stated the following: "We are horrified, we condemn, we protest, we chant that the government must step in, we call on men to call each other out, we protest some more, we bury, we move on." Is this the reality, or can we find positive ways of changing our society?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk. And after the sort of over hour and a half of input, one tends to feel a bit overwhelmed by the sheer volume of things to discuss. Yes. But I think that there is a level at which people being incensed by what they see remains important, and people raising their voices in protest remain important. I think, to Lisa's point, what people find important and which lives matter more than others, and why certain murders of certain women are highlighted and not others, remains for us to grapple with as a society. But the longer term solutions need to take a few things into consideration. I want to go back to Lisa talking about the fact that violence is gendered, and link it to Miranda around what childhood experiences are. The thing we know is that damaged people damage. And across the research, we can look at a multitude of reasons why young people from very, very adverse circumstances end up behaving in socially sort of aberrant ways. And the thing I want to talk about is that services also then become gendered, and that's become a lot of the problem. So if you look at services that are offered to young women, it often talks, even the article you quoted, it talks about empowering young women. And what does that mean for the boy child is that, well, is there anything for me to learn? What do I need to be engaged with? And we see that at that point, what becomes really interesting is that the Optimus study found that as many boy children were sexually abused as girl children, but when you start looking at the services that are offered, more girl children sought out services for sexual abuse as victims, whereas there's often no language for male victimhood. So what tends to happen is I've been watching the comments and the questions, and people are saying there's not enough diversion programs. The minute it's a diversion program, you are entering the child as a perpetrator, or as an accused, or as an offender against another child, whereas often the girl children are entered as victims. And this is shown very, very starkly in our shelter programs. So when women need to move away from home and they need to find shelter for themselves and their children, very often boys over the age of 7, and certainly boys in their pubescent and post-pubescent years, they cannot go with their mothers to the shelters. Now, the question you ask yourself is that what is the message that is being sent? That if, and I've had this in lockdown, that if a mother needs to leave and take her children with her, she cannot take her boy child with. that boy child has to be removed as a child in need of care, or the child has to remain with the abusive father. But there is no way to place that mother with a child in a shelter, because the shelter doesn't want older boy children. And as we sort of progress along the service delivery route and we look at the involvement of men and boys in programs, it seems that there's a progressive lack of men becoming involved, and by their own fault, because very often men just aren't brave enough to stand up to the fact that they feel beaten by the fact that their compatriots are behaving badly, and they just back down and say nothing. But we need to look at the fact that male victimhood, and that's not to excuse men's behavior, is something we need to engage with in young childhood. Because by the time we get to diversions, we are engaging with them as offenders, children who have already done some kind of offense. And then by the time they're adults, they're being imprisoned. And in the interim, when they are trying to seek shelter with their mothers, they're unable to do so because the system sees them as potential perpetrators. So the boy child is never ever seen as a victim, but rather as an offender in waiting. And we need to really change that and go right back to the beginning and look at what generates this sort of divergent gender kind of development, where you get 1 in 3 boys and girls being abused, but you get 1 in 3 women being abused as adults, which means that 1 in 3 men are abusers. So I think we need to look at it across the continuum of the entire life stage of gender development in order to make any impact long term.
So what can be done? I mean, because basically what it means is a total societal change of the mindset of men and boy children and the entire patriarchal society. How do we start to reverse this? Or are we just unable to do so? Because there has to be something, and it seems to me that it all starts with the control and power that men are given and that they exercise, and that somehow this turns into toxic masculinity because of the way in which they've been raised. Is it a problem that they don't have proper role models, and how do we fix that?
So I think there's 2 things. We need to be very honest with ourselves as a society, as a religious community. I saw someone mention, for example, under the comments, that the fact that within the sort of and I'm not Jewish and I say that openly, but within the Jewish more religious communities, men and women are separated, women dress modestly, men can't control their thought processes. And the whole idea is that men are these things that need to be subdued. And very often that's done through corporal punishment. And there's been this whole religious argument against the fact that corporal punishment, which has now been, as you know, as a judge, which has now been, well, reasonable chastisement has been made, not a defense. So you can't hit your children. People are in uproar that we're not allowed to hit our children. Hitting your child is a form of domestic violence. If your father is hitting your child, he is showing men that the way to create control within the home is to hit people. We found in research that I went through again around men who rape infants and toddlers, that they were physically disciplined primarily by their mothers, and their fathers were primarily absent. So rather than us again kind of splitting the genders and saying, you know, men need to be good role models and women need to be empowered, we need to recognize as a society that as genders, we are raising our children. And somewhere in our gendered relationships, we are getting this wrong. And the most important thing for me is to have conversations that do this honestly. So it's not blaming men or kind of disrespecting women, but it's an open thing. We are deeply flawed as human beings raising our children. And we look back at the mistakes we made. We go back a couple of decades and certain entire tracts of the population didn't have the vote. That changed. We go back further than that in Europe, just after the First World War, French women didn't have the vote. And now there's huge levels at which there is now the involvement of women. So we can move, but it requires very courageous, difficult conversations where we all recognize our part in both the issue that we are seen as being problematized, as well as the potential solutions. And most of it is about warm, caring relationships, protective adults, and people who actually show empathy and love to one another and can think about how their behavior affects another person. And you can only think about how your behavior affects somebody else if the effect of other people's behavior on you like your parents has been thought about.
Perhaps I just want to bring Roseanne back in now to ask her what Colenu is doing in the communities to deal with gender-based violence and violence in general.
Thanks, Cherise. So we've been involved for a while in education around the prevention of child sexual abuse with our School Safe program in schools. But more recently, and which has been great and very exciting for us, is that we've been involved in gender-based violence discussions with boys and girls from some private schools in Johannesburg. The grade 11s and the matrics have gotten together, and they're having these discussions where they are having open dialogue with each other. Just very quickly at the beginning of the first discussion, they did an exercise where they asked everyone to hold up 10 fingers, and the girls read out statements and said, if the statement applies to you, please put your fingers down. And it was things like, I've been catcalled, I'm scared to get in an Uber by myself for fear of being raped, my bad mood gets blamed on my gender. And by the end of the exercise, the majority of girls had their fingers down and all the boys had their fingers up. So it was very powerful to bring that message home to the boys as to how the girls feel. And really what's come out of the discussions is, as Luke's been discussing, the issue of how boys are socialized, and it's actually challenged them to look at how they've been socialized, and it's challenged them to start trying to get each other to call each other out on behavior and language, etc., and to stop sort of valuing everything that's masculine and denigrating everything that's feminine. So boys who want to be involved in cultural activities, for example, singing as opposed to playing rugby, also need to be treated with the same respect as your big jock who's playing rugby and getting girls, etc., etc. So these discussions have been amazing, and we're hoping to also start them within the Jewish day school environment. I know Yeshiva College has already got one planned for the end of next week, their first one, which is wonderful. And there's an organization in Cape Town called the Mensch organization, who are also doing this with male-only discussion groups to give the men a safe space to talk. And we've also been asked through SOJAS, which is the South African Union of Jewish Students, to partner with them, and please God, Luke will be joining us with that. We've been approached by SASCO, the South African Students Congress, which is the largest student movement in South Africa, to come and start training their male branch executives in gender-based violence in order to challenge the sexist structures that exist in the organizations, and to start, leading by having these dialogues and bringing change through getting the men to understand this. And I think it's important also to know that this is not, as Luke said, we're not blaming men. We need to have these conversations as well, and these conversations need to start at home around the dinner table with mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. We all need to start talking, because what blows us away about these young matrics and grade 11s is that these are our future leaders, and these are, never mind that, these are our future mothers and fathers who are going to be raising children. So I think we all need to have these conversations at root level. There also needs to be some sort of formal early education around this, whether in the LO syllabus or whatever. I think police need to be trained in how to deal with domestic violence victims. And I think we all need to start realizing that we are all part of the solution.
Thank you, Roseanne. I'd like to bring Sipho in now. Sipho Marima, who's the founder of the Barefoot Warrior and associated with an organization called Women for Change. So Sipho, tell us why you run the last part of a marathon or a race barefoot.
Thanks, Iris. Thank you very much. I think for me, it started, I think about a year ago. I was at a marathon, and then I saw a lady by the name of Sabi. She was running barefoot, and she was running it for victims of gender-based violence, and I had a conversation with her. So she told me that she's doing that because of her personal experience. And for me, the biggest question I had for myself was that what am I doing as an individual, especially as a man? What am I doing regarding gender-based violence? And I said, for my entire life, I've been ignoring this topic, and it has been happening around me, be it within my family or around the community. It has been happening. I've been seeing it, but I've never been available. So the biggest thing for me became availability as a man, to be able to have women be comfortable to talk to you, have men be comfortable to talk to you. And then another thing is that victims of gender-based violence find themselves lonely. They feel they have no one to talk to and no one supports them and no one believes them. When we run barefoot on the last 2 kilometers of every race, it's a way of us saying that, number one, we are here with you. We know what you're going through, and we are giving you our ear. Then in that way, people are comfortable to come and talk to us. When they talk to us, then we can redirect them to places where they can find help. You know, we can redirect them to experts who can give them advice on how to deal with the situations. Another thing that I've found from people that have come to me to ask for help is lack of knowledge. It's a big issue in the community. People don't know what to do when they are against perpetrators, or when it's happening in their families. They don't know where to go to, they don't know what to do. So lack of knowledge is one of the reasons where people stay in those relationships or stay in those homes, because they have no idea what to do or where to go to. You know? So when they come to us, they talk to us, then we're able to redirect them. Sabi has been selling beads. So the beads is what we wear on our feet when we run the last 2 kilometers barefoot. The money that's raised from the beads and then goes to homes of victims of gender-based violence. I mean, we are trying to break the silence of people having fear of not being believed. People keep quiet because they feel like no one is going to believe them. They feel people are going to judge them. So we are trying to say, we won't judge you. We don't have all the solutions. However, come talk to us and we'll redirect you to where you can get help. We'll try and assist you as much as we can. And I've been associated with Women for Change Race for the past 8 months. It's been an amazing journey. And what we basically do there, it's a race for women that takes a stand and invites men to come and join the race, be able to speak up, be able to be comfortable to say, I am a man, I am taking a stand against gender-based violence. I know it is not right. And I'm saying to my fellow brother, I'm saying to the men next to me, let's both take a stand. The more men get comfortable talking about this, the more men show that they are available to talk about this and assist, the more victims are comfortable to speak out because they don't feel judged. They feel that people care and people are listening and people are giving them an ear. So that's what we basically have been doing. So we've been raising money, taking it to homes where victims of gender-based violence have been situated, so we can try as much as we can to make sure that we assist where we can. So yeah, that's what I've been basically busy with.
Well, that's really so admirable, Sipho. We need more people like you in all of our communities all over South Africa trying to deal in some way with this. And what Sipho raises is a very important question, and I see there have been many people who've asked this question. What is it about our society that we do not believe the victims of gender-based violence? And there's this imperative of silence as well, that in reporting, women are not believed. They are called troublemakers. It's obviously a lot of time one person's word against the other. Why is it that we don't believe the woman and we believe the denial of men? I want to bring Brisila in here, if she's still with us, because I think this is one of the things you deal with in your research and in your practice. Why is it that women are not believed in our communities?
So the first part of that is that the culture of silence is one that has sustained our homes, unfortunately, for many years and is even seen in the context today. So the reason why we do not believe and we want to kind of deflect some of the interpretations around gender-based violence and sexual violence is because of the shame that the families then kind of take on. And there is a sense of wanting to maintain a certain image of the family, wanting to maintain a certain decorum of the family. And if there are particular members of the family that have caused this kind of trauma and violence, it's a whole sense of how do we cover our shame and not necessarily expose our families to being flawed in that kind of regard. So in terms of the idea of not being able to believe women and the idea of wanting to continue to silence them is because of all of these kinds of elements around needing to take the gaze away from our families because we want to portray them as whole and functioning entities.
Yes. Are there safe havens in our communities, Vuyisile, for women and children, or are these very few and far between?
So in terms of the shelters that are available, there are shelters around the country. And in terms of getting the information necessary about where you can get assistance, you have shelters.org.za that will then detail for you where you can get the necessary help. I think the challenge that we have with our structures of support is the lack of funding and the lack of initiative in terms of growing the number of safe havens that we can create for women and children. We do have certain organizations that work tirelessly around being able to come together and assist victims. One of those is TS Foundation. And I find that, you know, in the work that they do, they have services where women can reach out, 24-hour lines. They've got USSD codes where you can kind of dial in and get the assistance that you need. And they also partner up with Namola, which is a service that is one that deals with emergency responses. And they also speak to the people who work for Namola in terms of how to contain victims of violence. So we also have people opposing women abuse. We've got Sonke Gender Justice. We also have Mushate as an NGO, and we have other organizations that are empowered. We see on television, for example, ads that have been put out for support. We know that Joko is also in partnership with POWA in terms of providing support. We also find Brave as well as other means that other corporates have come together to try and address the situation. So the help is there, and it is information that is freely and widely available. I think in terms of our role as social agents, it's being able to advocate and continue to create platforms where we can have these kind of critical discussions around gender-based violence at the level of the basic and the layman in our communities, where we can then empower them with the necessary knowledge of what are the resources that surround them when we are looking at resilience against gender-based violence.
Thank you. Thanks, Vuyisile. Sipho, there is a 5-kilometer and a 10-kilometer virtual fun run on Women's Day on the 9th of August. We're going to watch a quick video about Women for Change, who are organizing this. And for more information, one can visit their Facebook page.
Being a woman means freedom, powerful, and claiming my space.
Women in South Africa is not safe. They are walking targets of rape and violence.
I committed to become a Women for Change ambassador because
I am a woman and I'm a woman for women. Because this movement really speaks close to my heart.
The change that I want to see now happen is that
a serious evaluation of the consequences of committing a crime needs to be validated.
I want to see gender-based violence come to an end in our beautiful country. Whether you're a runner or not, we need you to support our movement.
Thank you. We've got a lot of messages being coming up at the moment about various other shelters and organizations who are assisting with victims of gender-based violence, as well as certain programs for young men. And we will put those all up, and they will be available on the YouTube video, which will be put up for anyone to watch after this live webcast. Luke, I just want to bring you in again. The government has introduced what they call an emergency response action plan on gender-based violence and femicide. They've committed to the prevention of gender-based violence by providing care, support, and healing for victims, enhancing the legal and policy framework, strengthening the criminal justice system, and the economic empowerment of women. Is this enough? There doesn't seem to be any input by government on dealing with the problems that you talk about, being the male child and where he goes from being a young boy to becoming a rapist or murderer.
They always say that mad boys were once sad boys, and I do think that when we look at what the government is looking at doing, a lot of what the protest actions have been about, and a lot of what the lobbying has been about, has been, and where the money is going as a result, has been for what they're calling a strengthening of the criminal justice system, a legislative reform. And there are many, I mean, you're a judge and you know better than anybody. Our country has incredible laws. We have just passed some incredible amendments to the Child Justice Act to assist in terms of young offenders. And we really are progressive in the way we think legislatively. But that legislative thought process is actually carried out by people who very often carry the same prejudices of the people that we are worried about who are committing gender-based violence, because the services are run by people. And I think when we look at prevention, the prevention is very much neglected all round. So if we look at systemic violence, unemployment, violence within communities, violence in homes, substance abuse, all the sort of central and contributing factors to violence, those issues are so broad that the government doesn't really almost know where to start with preventing gender-based violence. So they're working backwards and they're strengthening a system that is coming in at the end when the offenses have already occurred. And what they're asking for is longer sentences, no parole, you know, incarcerations that carry on endlessly. They're asking for perpetrators to be treated much more severely. Whereas if we think back, the severe childhoods of some of these people may have been the reasons that they ended up in these severe adult circumstances. So I think that the government needs to have the strong legislative response, because the deterrent factor when people do not have an internal locus of control, when they can't control their own behavior, an external control like a criminal justice system is important, but they need to refocus that system to focus it on the victim and making it victim-centered, which it certainly is not. And if you look at Olivia, you'll see that it is totally focused around the offender. Even when the offender is convicted, that person's rights still supersede those of the victims. So the disincentives to enter the system are massive. So the system, it disincentivizes victims and doesn't really kind of deter offenders. But if we go back, there is but there's very little resource put into prevention. And prevention is where we need to start, so that the small criminal justice system we do have can manage what it has properly, because it is not having the volumes coming through it that it has at the moment, which you just simply cannot manage.
So those are the programs and incentives of government to deal with the crime once it has happened. There has to be, on the other side, people dealing with preventing these crimes from happening. Absolutely. And offering some sort of curative way in which to change the mindset of young men and young adults.
And it has to be young boys. Sorry, Cherise. We have to start with young boys, because I think that once something is ingrained, you're always working backwards. We need to start with our young boys. And boys need to be engaged, not just when diversion programs happen, but in their own victimhood. And the fact that victimhood is not necessarily becoming a perpetrator, but as someone said earlier, might make you a stronger advocate to actually go out and talk to other men as to why they should not behave in these ways.
Yes. And on that note, another poll has gone up. This is our last poll. And let's hear from our young men in the audience. If you hear someone using sexist language or making a sexist joke, do you actually tell them that it's wrong and unacceptable? And there are various answers. I'm sure everybody's going to answer, I always tell people to stop it, but unfortunately, I don't think that is necessarily what happens in real life. Boys want to be one of the boys, respected amongst their peers for things that maybe they should not be respected for. And they need role models that they can look up to. And perhaps what we need to have in regard to young boys is a role model roadshow of their so-called heroes, the sports stars, the music stars, going around and getting it ingrained in their mindset, how not to act in a sexist fashion, how not to become a statistic of a person who's perpetrating gender-based violence. So interestingly enough, on the poll, some people have been very honest. They've said they don't tell their peers that it's wrong. I'm too scared to, it makes me look bad. Others have said, I don't think they mean it, so I don't think it's a problem. And most people have said they occasionally tell them that it's wrong and unacceptable. 39% have said, I always tell people to stop it. Well, what we need is 100% of people to say, to call them out and to be the man amongst boys in those sorts of situations. And on that note, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for a most interesting, informative, and hopefully rehabilitative exercise that we've gone through on ways in which we can try to stem the tide of gender-based violence. Howie.
Cherise, thank you so much for chairing tonight's panel. It's been so informative, so interesting, and just watching all of the comments coming in through the comment section on both YouTube as well as on Zoom. It's been absolutely amazing. We've been watched by approximately 2,000 people tonight who've watched this panel, and that's really heartwarming that this is an issue so close to so many people's hearts. So before we go, we've spoken tonight about the Angel Network. We've seen the amazing work that they've done with the Vuvuzela crew. We've looked at what they've done with rape comfort packs, and we'd like to show you one last video from the Angel Network, and we're going to ask people, if you are able to contribute at such a worthy cause, please pick up your phone. You'll see at the end of the video, there's in fact a 3D barcode. You can pick up your phone, point it at that barcode, and it will allow you to donate. So Dan, please play us the final Angel Network video.
Has always been about giving a hand up. Currently, it's all about handouts to prevent millions from dying of starvation. Never before have the needs been so great by so many who have so little. As you can see, what's happening behind us is real Ubuntu. It's strangers coming together, packing food for other strangers so that they won't go hungry tonight.
donors and all the people who are helping us. May God bless them all.
God bless you guys.
And may you continue helping all the communities in South Africa. Thank you very much.
Melrose, Northbird, Heaven, and Angels Network, thank you so much. Toda Rakbar, we thank you so much for the contributions that you brought for the kids and the community. May God bless you so much. Thanks for looking after your neighbor. It's written.
So if we could ask people to take out their phones and maybe just scan the code there, the wallet doc, and let's try and make sure that, in fact, we continue to support the Angel Network and what they do. I'm so happy to tell everyone that that was my can, the Melrose North can, that you're seeing the visuals of, run by Ricky Lyons and myself. And so far, we've provided 125,000 meals to the people of Kliptown during this period of lockdown. So we're enormously grateful for all the support from the Angel Network and the amazing work that they do. And we do plead with you, please, if you are able to, it would be just amazing if you could make a donation to them this evening. Cherise, it's been such a remarkable panel, and I must say I'm so sorry we didn't have more time, because in particular Olivia was busy telling us her story. Yes. And we cut her short, and it's such a traumatic and remarkable story, but it's a story of survival and a story of perseverance and a story of such bravery. Like, I feel in some way we didn't do her sufficient justice tonight. So I think we should apologize for that, because here you have one of the most brave women who years later has stood up for what happened to her as a 12-year-old child. And that story is absolutely horrendous. But what remarkable bravery we've actually seen from her and all the other victims tonight, don't you think?
It's been amazing. Apologies, Olivia. It seemed that we were running out of time, and the polls were coming up. But we can always have another interview with her on this traumatic time that she's been through, and perhaps deal with the criminal justice system and whether and how it may be failing people in a position such as hers.
You know, I think the trauma that she was expressing to us is not just the trauma of the original rape, but the trauma of going to court. Yes, and the trauma of the parole. And just to relive that every single time is unbelievable. So to all the victims who shared their stories tonight, I think you are incredibly brave, and we salute all of you. And thank you so much for making tonight's panel so real to so many people who've actually watched. Cherise, Judge Cherise Wiener, thank you for putting together and helping us put together this remarkable panel this evening. To all of our panelists, thank you for giving of your time. You're doing such a valuable service to the people of South Africa. To Dan Stillerman, who has been pulling all the knobs and tweaking everything behind the scenes. Dan, thank you for everything that you do. You are a true mensch. You're a man among men, and I know this is a very important issue in your life as well. And something that you are very passionate about too. Hey, Dan?
Yeah, you know what? I think I try to do my bit to stand up and speak up and have the conversations. And I can personally say I've supported the Women for Change run, which happens every year. I think even twice a year. It's going to be happening again on the 9th of August. We did post details, so we do encourage everybody to join that. It's on a Sunday. It's on National Women's Day. And whether you're a runner or not, it's just a great way to step up and get involved. And yeah, I think it's long overdue that we all speak up and stand up and take action. So well done to Cherise, to you, Howard, and to everybody involved, all the panelists, and as we said, the brave survivors of gender-based violence who have stood up and spoken up.
Dan, we're saying a little.
Sorry, Howard, I just say I see that one of the topics that came up is from Gail Landau, who's a major knitter for Warm the World. So we'll just have a little bit of a post of Warm the World. And she says it was an excellent discussion, perhaps a follow-up one with victims sharing what was helpful in aiding their recovery and more about the existing services available. Also, what can be done to make the legal process for victims less traumatic so that this powerful discussion translates into meaningful action. And I think that's a very, very valid comment and topic. And we can have Olivia back, Sepati, Sashali, and various other victims who can show how they have overcome this tragedy and trauma in their lives and what more can be done to assist them.
Well, Sharice, I'm going to prevail upon you if you're willing for one favor. And that is, I think when those victims spoke and we cut them short and Sapati was having difficulty with her internet connection, maybe what we can do is just record a Zoom interview with each of them and send them out to the thousands of people who've actually watched, so the victims can all have their say in all of this.
That's a brilliant idea, and I'm ready, willing and available whenever you can organize it.
So on behalf of the South African Jewish Report, I want to thank you all for watching. We'll see you on the weekend. We'll see you on Saturday night for comfort cooking. And I think we need some comfort after the trauma that we've listened to tonight. And on Monday, on Sunday, we're going to be doing home repairs as well. So we look forward to seeing you there. A huge thank you to everyone. Please stay safe, stay sanitized, stay at home, and we'll see you on Saturday. Thank you all for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night. And we'll send out the recording and all the links via email tomorrow, so you will get that all.